we're really passionate about that, so I took away everything you're saying there. Without further ado, I'd love to introduce Hana Seddon from Salvation Army. Come on. A proud mum of 2, studying theology down in Otago, because she's got heaps of time on her hands. Very passionate about everything to do with social justice education, so awesome.
Kia ora tātou. He mihi aroha atu ki a koe, Alan, mo tō mihi mai kia hau, kia mātou nei. On my father's side, I actually hail from Tauranga Moana, Ngāti Pukenga, Ngāti Rangi Nui, Ngāti Rangi. And of course in the Hokianga from Ngāpuhi and Te Rarawa. And of course on my mother's side, I'm very Irish. And so it's a real pleasure to be with you and to meet up with Alan again. Did you know he once upon a time worked for the Salvation Army? It's a wonderful organisation. Kia ora, Alan. So I don't have a flash PowerPoint. But I just want to keep it simple to make a lot of room for questions at the end for us all. And I suppose a little bit of going backwards, thinking about the present, and then wondering about the future. If I could start by saying that I was raised in Lower Hutt in Taita, in public housing, and raised by a single parent who was on a benefit, and somehow managed to find at least a $2 or $3 surplus every week, swore against debt all of the time, and had an opinion about politicians and social justice and all sorts of things. And I grew up in an environment where, by the classification that we use, definition of child poverty, I would have been a child in poverty. And when I think back to how I made it through that and into a space where who do I think I am going to university 5 times in 20 years? Who do I think I am that I could have a voice to actually bring some thoughts forward and to bring some leadership? Who do I think I am? And when I think about the fact that yes, many people by definition are in poverty, and yet while we work this stuff out, this is what it feels like. It feels like I think back to my childhood and I think about the unseenness. While people talk on TV about academically what it feels like and the statistics and all of those sorts of policy questions, which are superbly important, they are. What is the experience of actually being that child, or being those children, or being a mother of those children? And I think that while we do this kind of reflection and while we think about all of these things, we have to keep the relationships with whānau who are actually going through these things and hear their views and hear what it is that they would have to say. Because I know for me, I didn't understand all the reasons why we were in this situation, and even as a young woman, a Māori woman growing up, it wasn't until my 20s and 30s as I went through a process of being educated and understanding things like colonisation that I began to understand, whoa, that's a real thing in Aotearoa. This actually has a huge impact on how our social systems, our education system, our health system, all of these things are designed, and it has an impact on where we see leadership stepping forward or sitting back or being allowed to step forward or not being allowed to. All of those sorts of things I was blessed to take part in. I'm a mother of 2 children. One is 25, one's 23, and I'm going to be a grandmother in December, just saying. And when I think about my grandchild, do I want them to fall in that definition or have that experience of being a child born into poverty? And while Alan and Max and others who are brilliant work those things out, I want to share a little bit about what it looks like on the ground today in the Bay of Plenty. In Rotorua, we're based, there's a team of us here from Salvation Army. Actually, that's the Salvation Army table just over there. From Tauranga, from Rotorua. What does it look like today to be a child who is experiencing the reality of the implementation of these decades of particular policies or preferences? I was listening to your presentation, and when you were talking about wanting to be in surplus, the kind of preference, the government's preference to be in surplus, yeah, I think all the people that we see during the week that come in, they would have a preference to be in surplus too. But if I was to draw up 2 lines, they would go in a different direction, and within the next 2025, 26, they wouldn't be just so easily reset. There are some fundamentally just huge issues that people are dealing with that mean that housing costs have gone up, but accommodation supplements have got limits, which means that you are always faced with choices. And some of those choices if you haven't been brought up in a family that has a mindset, I guess that has access to understanding how to work with your finances in a way, to have opportunities, to people to mentor you, you kind of do just what's in front of you. And what's often in front of people is creating more debt, but not the positive debt that you're talking about. The kind of debt that means that people knock on your door and repossess your car or kick you out of your house or whatever it is, that you end up with such a bad reputation that it just keeps going down this way. And as you go down this way, you don't just think, oh well, tomorrow's another day, let's get up and try again. You think, how am I going to hold this pain that I feel? I know, alcohol, that's a good one. As someone who's been in recovery for 16 years from drugs and alcohol and smoking, but clearly not cake, I know the pain and the kind of medication that drugs and alcohol bring. So I know why people do it. They're trying to survive, they're trying to get through, and they have children that they're trying to raise in this environment where they don't know the reasons why everything's just going crazy. It just is. And so people are doing the best maybe they think they can do. And I think there's a massive opportunity for all of us that are interested in the things that we're interested in. Otherwise, why are you here tonight? We have an opportunity to speak into those lives in a way that if we don't, it keeps going like this. And in the last 20 years, as I've been in the Salvation Army and worked frontline social work, addictions, reintegration, all these different places, I have seen what happens when communities and groups get together and they genuinely want to show aroha in whatever culture, in whatever language, in whatever form, be it food, fellowship, advocacy, trying to shut down that additional bottle store, whatever love looks like in your place, it's supremely important. I think about conversations I've had just in the last few weeks, visiting hospitals, mental health wards, and sitting in places where traditionally a minister might not necessarily sit. But in those places, you're able to have conversations. People don't want to talk about policy and law, and some people do, but often people want to talk about, is there a way forward? Is there hope? And so hope doesn't just rely on that one person pulling themselves up by the bootstraps and actually finding a way forward. It relies on a collaborative approach to us working together and bringing the brilliance that we all have and not waiting for everyone to deserve it before we work on each other's sides, before we align ourselves. And where I have seen that work really, really well, I have seen whole families change, generations impacted, you know. I think I want to make special mention in particular, when you look through all of these statistics and numbers and policies, there is a real emphasis on Māori. I was thinking about the fact that the cost of superannuation is going to rise in these years to come, but you think about, that will be majority Pākehā people, right? Retiring, somehow we need to be able to pay for superannuation. Do you know what we have? We have this young, brown, burgeoning population of potential. When I look at my children, my young brown children, and I think, what does society tell you that you are? If I was to try and get you to give me a list of 10 things society says you are, what is it? What are we telling our young brown people that they are? These are the ones that will be your workforce. Because why? Many facts. Māori and Pacific populations, we've got a lot of love. We fill up houses faster than other people, right? Yep. So, you know, you might have not the 2.5 children, it's more like the 11 children or the 7 children or what have you. And so when I look at that, I think, awesome. Look at this amazing workforce to pay for superannuation costs in the years to come. And so then I think, so then how do we get alongside them? Because they're going to grow up, they're going to put their energy into something. May it be something that will be of benefit to them, to their people, and to the whole country. So when we look at these issues, these financial issues, we need to get strategic about how do we support young people. You need relationships with their parents, with their aunties, with whoever. So how do we develop relationships locally, especially with the hardest to get to? I think that's on us to try and find a way to reach people. Working in prisons, especially in some prisons, it can be really hard to develop relationships with people who are like, whatever, I know what you think of me. But I have seen time and time again where people have been given the space to hear a new message, to dream a new dream, to hope and to try things and to have support to grow and eventually move in a different direction with their life. It's really hard work. And then their children and their children have followed that pathway. We need to see more of that happening. When I think about what is the future for Rotorua, for Tauranga, for all of us in the Salvation Army as we contemplate the work that we do, we can't just keep doing stuff the same old way. We have a food bank, for example. We were just talking about it on the way over. We kind of get into this rhythm of this is what we do, yay for us, we did this many food parcels. I mean, we don't do that, but like if someone were to do that, I imagine that they might think, yes, look at what we've done. But what we're really starting to look at is what difference did it actually make? What difference did this mahi actually make to people? What difference is it making? And so where we are, we're starting to ask people what makes the real difference for you? Is it a food parcel or is there something else? Conversations, relationships, interventions that are just so much more different than the way the kind of the mindset that we've been in for such a long time. I'll give you an example. Te reo Māori. I began to learn when I was 27, I'm 45 this year, and when I was 27 started to learn, and it unlocked in me something different. My mother, who's Pākehā, was never interested, and she's very happy for me. Good on you, dear, go do your thing. But it wasn't for her. But for me, all of a sudden, it woke something up in me that I couldn't explain, and it gave me access to all kinds of other ways of thinking of things, relationships, people, and it's taken me on a trajectory that I never imagined, just the simple act of reclaiming language. You might think that has nothing to do with social issues and what have you, but it's actually opened up a whole new world and given me opportunities I didn't have before. And now we started teaching a Te Reo Māori class in Rotorua. 30 people come to that. And there's a whole range from all sorts of different walks of life who sit in that room from about 80-something to about early teenagers, late teenage years. And in this room, they began to have conversations and build relationships with one another. And then opportunities to work together to so-and-so needs someone to come and fix their washing machine. So, it's just creating a space where people can learn and kind of even up the playing field, it's rather than this person being in a totally different walk of life, there's an equalisation that happens. And in the equalisation around the coffee and cake table, or apples, whatever is your gig, these conversations happen which lead to life, which lead to inclusion, which lead to aroha. And so I guess what I'm saying is it takes, yes, there's the obvious things, yes, advocacy, and yes, counselling, and yes, all of these sorts of things, parenting programs, but also the really ordinary things, the stopping to talk to people, the creating space for fellowship, the, hey, what do you think about this? Want to come along to do this? I think this is what we need is, yes, to rely on the government to do its part, but actually right down at the grassroots level, we need some community leadership to actually do things that only the community can do, that only our families and our neighbours can do. That shouldn't have to be set out in a policy document. It should just come from a place of aroha. It should come from a place of we're concerned about what's happening to our neighbour, we're concerned about what's happening. When I look at my boy, and he's having a child that will come into this world having to deal, I guess, with all of the different decisions that we've made as a community. I want to know that we have all tried our best to kind of move things forward. I know that, again, just as we were talking in the car, the conversation was about changing income levels and debt levels and things like that, but it's also about changing relationships and changing choices. For myself, when I think about my own journey, leaving behind a world of bad choices and a world of different decisions, it took for someone to come and stand alongside me. It took for someone to come and stand alongside me. No one in a formal professional role, just for somebody to come and reach out, to actually put a face to the caring that the policy is supposed to be representing, the well-being that the policy is supposed to direct us to. It took the face of someone to actually come and be present. I think the Salvation Army and many other social services have a really important role, but I think it needs to be more than that. I think it needs to be more community-based. I spoke to another young person tonight who was at my house on the way before I came over here, and I said to her, what are the most kind of pressing matters for kids who are dealing with poverty? And she said, for her as a young mum, she's got a 6-month-old baby. She reflects on how the experiences have been for her nieces and nephews. None of them are wealthy, none of them are not at all. I'd say probably half of the parents are on benefits and things like that, just trying to deal with life. High housing costs and high levels of debt and struggling to get their kids to school, especially in a COVID environment. When I talked to her about what do you see are the issues for kids who are born into and growing up in this environment, she said the biggest thing I've noticed here is mental health. And I think, I don't know how you're seeing this, but where we are, every day, especially moving down from Auckland to Rotorua to the Bay of Plenty and Tauranga, I have seen people really struggling with just the most basic of things. I don't know if you read the article that came out about the health profession and just the levels of burnout that people are experiencing. Now these are people who have all sorts of resources and kind of people they can turn to. What does it look like when you've isolated yourself, when you've got ridiculous levels of debt, when you're struggling with all kinds of financial issues as a parent, as a caregiver, and you've got kids who you're trying to bring up to the best of your ability. You're struggling with addiction issues. You're struggling with high costs of, high accommodation costs. What is the impact on kids? And she described to me things like people going to school and even as little children, just the comparisons and how even as a little kid, people struggling with depression at primary school. People, before they've even hit high school, people feeling suicidal, all of these sorts of strong feelings that our young people are having, which are even more pressed down when you add things like exclusion because of your culture, because of racism, because of disability, all of those sorts of things. You have young people who are just struggling, right, to put themselves out there into this world that feels really hard. And often as adults, I don't know about you, but we're often pyong pyong here, there and everywhere, and we see kids go past us all of the time. But how often do we actually stop to try and find a connection for that kid, to find a way into their world, to try and find a way to make a connection for that child and for that family? And so as I spoke to her, this is actually a person who's going to be coming to work with us, I talked to her about what her vision would look like for young people, the majority of whom we will see probably at the Salvation Army would fit into our definition of child poverty, of what poverty means. What does it look like to create an environment where those kids will thrive? And some of the first things she talked about was just about distracting people from, not tricking them, distracting them from the reality, the harsh reality that they're living with every day. Having a place where they can come and see that there are people who love them, care about them, who are not stressed out all the time, people who are straight and focused and all about, these young people. But okay, cool. And what else? Well, getting their ideas, hearing them. What do they want to do? What are their, what do they want to achieve? What do they want to do in the community? And so this is that kind of empowering and hearing their voices. Okay. And then maybe we could kind of work together to get all the different generations together. She comes from a very large extended family. And so what does it mean where people are not just in their own isolated houses, but we're actually working together again, fellowshipping together again, doing life together again? What does that look like? And so I can hear this young person trying to find a way through so that when children get into their teenage years, unlike me, they don't pick up drugs and alcohol to try and medicate the pain of what it is to be in this world when you're constantly dealing with a world that doesn't seem to think you're worth much unless you look a particular way, or your bank balance has a certain amount of money, or your house looks like this, or you can afford to go and do the school trips and things like that, that we wouldn't have to grow such resilience for this group of people, that we could change the world and make it more kind and caring. But she's also trying to create another layer of family. And I think that's going back to an earlier point that I said, it isn't up to the government to make all of those decisions. And we can't leave it all on each individual household and just assume, oh well, it's up to each individual person. There's something as a community, at the community level, we need to do to be able to kind of change the trajectory for people. Because the reset after COVID, for many people, it hasn't reset back to what it was. It's continued to get more and more difficult. And to interrupt that is going to take more than medium and long-term policy. It's going to take something in the short term, just like what you were describing before, brother, when you talked about that level, kati community kind of level, that passion about our communities, our working together, our creativity to be able to create something new. I want to finish just with a short waiata that has kind of maybe a familiar tune to you, but again it talks about the flax bush, and at the centre of it, the protecting of something really, really important. And yes, policy, absolutely 100%, and yes, individual and family responsibility. But right here we have this other conversation about a community that surrounds what's inside, because what's inside these young people, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata, in order to become part of something bigger, these early years are just so incredibly important and need to be protected. So you can join in with me if you know it, or you can just listen. Hutia terito o te hana ke kaihia te komako e ko ki mai ki a nui, te manui, o te neia, maku e ki atu, kia koe, he tangata, he tangata.